Evening once again. We're continuing our Bible study series this evening on into Lesson 5. And we're looking, and this particular lesson concerns the origin of human civilization. Specifically, we're looking at this evening at Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, and also at various human religious customs. You know, people look around and they see civilization that man has created and they take it for granted. A lot of people consider that the civilization that we have in the Western world is essentially Christian civilization. Now, there are certainly Christian aspects. There's Christian terminology, and there are certain biblical principles that individuals have sought to apply. But primarily, as we're going to see this evening, so much of the things that are typical of our society and our culture do not go back to the laws and the commandments of God nearly so much as they go back to the things that we're going to look at here this evening. Now, we looked last time at the story of the pre-flood world and the events that developed that resulted in God's judgment on the world. Now, in the aftermath of that, when the flood subsided and Noah and his family got off the ark, with about 100 years, just over 100 years goes by before we come to the events right here that we're going to cover this evening. Now, in the course of this 100 years, the population of the earth grew dramatically. There were Noah's three grown sons began having children within just a year or two of the time they got off the ark, and so as some time passed, the human population increased very rapidly. And as we pick up the story this evening, about just over 100 years after that, we find that human beings did not really learn very much of a lesson. It wasn't long before people began to drift back into the same sorts of things. Now, God put a stop to it in the sense that He caused the human family to spread out. He confused and confounded the languages. But it's apparent in both the record of history as well as the secular history as well as the Bible that within a short time, man began once again to establish his own system, cut off from God. And the Tower of Babel is really the font from whence man's post-flood civilization has sprung. Now, let's notice back here as we open our Bibles to the book of Genesis, and let's notice a little bit of the events right after the flood. We'll pick it up in Genesis chapter 10. In Genesis 10 and verse 1, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. And it begins to go through and enumerate these sons. And we find down in verse 6 that Ham had sons. He had Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush were Seba and Havilah and Sabta and Ramah and Sabteca, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba and Dedan. Then we're told in verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it was said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now here was Nimrod, whose very name is derived from the Hebrew word marad, which means he rebelled. So here is a man whose very name has the connotation of rebel. We're told that he began to be a mighty one in the earth. Now, if you look up this term in Strong's Concordance or some other reference source, you find that the Hebrew word that's translated mighty one here is gibor. And it literally means a tyrant or a despot. Nimrod began to be a tyrant. He began to try to establish tyrannical human government. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. He was an individual of great power, great prowess, and we're told in verse 10 that the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. That was where he started. Now, when we come over to the next chapter, in chapter 11, we find that Babel is, of course, the place where humanity sought to build a tower. And we find that the name of the tower in Genesis 11 verse 9 was Babel. Now, that of course is that was the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom. That's where he started. And Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. That is the land of Babylon. So the Babylonian system derives from Nimrod. It was a system that encompassed representatives of virtually all humanity. That's why when you look at civilizations that spread out, whether you go to India or China, or whether you look at European civilization or Egypt, the Greeks, the Romans, all the various groups of people, you find there is a convergence of their mythology that in many cases it was very easy to identify the gods worshipped by the Greeks and the Romans with the same God that the Egyptians worshipped and the same gods that various other societies and cultures had. That's because the civilization of all mankind, a great deal of it traces back to Babylon. Now each group, each branch of the human family has put its own modifications on, but we find that Nimrod, who was Noah's great-grandson, he was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham. And he was the one who put together this system there, centered in Babylon. Now, one of the things that's apparent, it brings out he was a mighty hunter. You can imagine a situation in the aftermath of the flood that, vegetation came up and was, quickly rejuvenated. That came the most quickly. And then there was a multiplication of the animal population. You can just imagine, because of course, when you look at the way God designed it, various animals let's take rabbits and mice and things of that sort, for instance. How long do you think it took for them to just, be multiplying by the hundreds and by the thousands? Well, some of the animals that would have preyed on them, such as wolves or coyotes or foxes and things of that sort, would have also reproduced quickly because they had total food supply, but they wouldn't have reproduced as quickly. But within a matter of years, the human population was very small. So what you find is, of course, that the animal population, including predators, would have reproduced very quickly, and within a period of 40, 50, 60 years, you can well imagine that there could have very easily been problems, and Nimrod, we're told, was a mighty hunter. So that was evidently his key to organizing the human race, that he was put himself forth as the protector, and they built this city, this walled city, and then the tower there. Now, Babel was his starting point, and we read of that. We also read, as we come on a little later down here in Genesis 11, verse 1, that the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, because we're only about 100 years after the flood. And so there had not naturally grown up any divisions in speech in that short a time, and everyone was able to understand one another. It came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Speaking of humanity, as they came down from the mountain area of Armenia and looked for a good fertile farming area, this was one of the first places they came. And they said one to another, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So they did not want to repopulate the earth. And Nimrod was evidently one of the key individuals who was stirring this desire to stay right there. Now, they began this process, and we're told in verse 8 that the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build a city. You know, it was God's purpose. They knew that they were supposed to spread out. God had probably allocated a period of time, giving several generations for the human family to grow, with the idea that, at a certain point, as the population by this time had reached maybe a few thousand, and that's, you can do the math and sort of figure it out and realize that within a relatively short time, you begin to geometrically multiply out. And I think I've mentioned the example earlier. This summer we had my wife's family had a family reunion. Her grandmother, who is I think 92, is still living and able to be relatively active, and so all of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren all got together and they had a family reunion, and we counted up that of direct descendants. This isn't counting mates or anything of that sort, but she had a large family herself, and I think it was something like 125 living descendants that she had, and every single one of them weren't able to come, but by the time that mates and all were there were a considerable number of people, about 150, 160. If the later generations had as many children as she did, or even as some of her children did, the numbers would have been far larger. So you can imagine as you began to come out to add in a little further that the numbers were getting on up at this point, and it would have. People knew what God's purpose was. Noah had undoubtedly informed them, and that they were going to need to spread out as colonies and to go back to some of these areas, because it was not God's purpose that all of the humanity just be concentrated there in one spot, or that God had purposely designed that there be different branches of the human family, different racial groups, and they were to spread out and go to their areas, which separated them out and maintained their own separate identity. And they didn't want to do it that way. Yet that was what God had in mind. So we find that there was an attitude of rebellion against God's plan and purpose. There was an attitude of rebellion that was there, and Nimrod undoubtedly stirred it. Now we find, of course, that represented here were the ancestors of virtually all of humanity. Genesis 11:1 makes that plain, that the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. It was all one family, the family of Noah, that were there, and of course the wives of his sons, who let's say in-laws, but they all spoke the same language. Now God said in verse 7, Genesis 11 verse 7, Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Eternal scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build a city. And this is the name of it, called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the languages of all the earth, and from thence did the Eternal scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So God said, let us go down and confound their language. Now this again is another section that you can compare with the verse back earlier in Genesis where God said, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness," clearly showing that there is a conversation going on here that involved more than one individual. It involved the Father and Christ. Now, God was not pleased with man's attempt to establish one world under the leadership of Nimrod at Babel. He was not pleased with man trying to do what he was doing in rebellion against God. God wanted to separate out the various groups and to have them resettle the earth and to maintain their own identity. They decided under Nimrod's instigation that they were all going to stay together right there. They would build them a tower. They would build them something. Perhaps the idea was that it would, that they wouldn't die in a flood again, or that they would and somehow have some sort of special protection. God saw the attitude, and He saw that this was something that was going to have to be stopped. And so He did. Now, as we come on through, we notice here, let's just turn back into Genesis 10, that all of the various families of the human race are defined here in Genesis 10. Genesis 10:32 tells us, "These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations in their nations. And by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood." So the families of Noah's sons, his grandchildren, and in some cases even great-grandchildren, but primarily by the time you got to the grandchildren of Noah, things began to sort out, and various tribal groupings that actually reach back to that point. And this is the means by which the earth was repopulated. The current nations are derived from Noah's descendants. Now, we read here about Babel, that the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel. You know, Babel is just another form of the same word, Babylon. And that, of course, is the system that God uses to describe this world and this society. In Genesis and Revelation, chapter 17, and verse 5, when John sees this system, he sees this creature and this woman sitting upon it. And verse 5 of Revelation 7, "Upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." So what John saw was the ultimate outgrowth of a system that had its beginnings after the flood, had its beginnings with the city that Nimrod built. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And that term has been used to refer and to describe the system that man has built in rebellion against God all the way down through time. You know, in many ways you could say that the Bible is a tale of two cities. Now, perhaps you haven't thought of it in quite that way, but you know, the book of Genesis opens with two cities, and the book of Revelation closes with two cities. You see, in Genesis 10 and 11, we read of the city that Nimrod built, Babel. And then we read in Genesis 12 of a man whom God called out of Babel. A man who lived there in the land of Shinar, in the land of the Chaldeans. A man by the name of Abram. And we find that God told him to get out, to get away from that area and go to a place that He would show him. And in Genesis 14 we read that Abram came in contact with a man whose name is Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High God, the king of Salem, or Jerusalem, who met Abraham and blessed him and served him bread and wine. Well, we could go through that, but we find there the place from which Abraham was called and the place to which he went to receive the blessing of God. Abraham was called out of Babylon. When we come all the way back to the book of Revelation, we find that Babylon, once again, the people of God are called out of Babylon. Revelation 18. Come out of her, my people. Then we're told that Babylon is destroyed. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. The city that Nimrod built will not stand the test of time. It will collapse. It will be destroyed. The city that Abraham saw, and that for which he looked, because he looked for a city that has foundations, whose maker and builder is God. And in the end of the book of Revelation, we find that city coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. The New Jerusalem. So there is a contrast. And ultimately, everything in history can be divided as between those who are living their lives in quest of the city that Nimrod built and those who are looking for a city that has foundations, whose maker and builder is God. Not Nimrod, not the devil, but God. And we find some of this brought out right here. The ultimate outcome, you see, the Babylon is used to represent the system that mankind has built up in on his own in defiance of the Creator. Now, the ultimate destiny, the ultimate outcome of that city, whose foundations were laid by Nimrod, we find in Revelation 18 and verse 2, that Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of demons, the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. All nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. God tells His people, come out of her, verse 4, that you be not partakers of her sins, that you receive not of her plagues. So, we find that is going to occur. In verse 10, we find those standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, in 1 hour is your judgment come. You know, I think it's a remarkable description there in light of we've just in the last few days, the last few weeks, have gone through the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. And of course that's exactly what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the bomb was dropped, and within, instantaneously, there was destruction on a scale that was previously unimaginable. You know, when you read what it describes here, you read about in verse 8 of Revelation 18, her plague shall come in 1 day, death and mourning and famine. She shall be utterly burned with fire. It talks about in verse 9, the kings of the earth bewailing when they see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment. You know, here they are out there, and what do they see? They see the mushroom-shaped cloud coming up. And they stand afar off for fear of her torment, because what happens if you get close? What happens if you get close? Well, then you get the radiation and all of that. And so they keep their distance, but they see the smoke of her burning. That's what it says in the end of verse 9. See, they see the smoke of her burning. And they're standing afar off. Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, in 1 hour is your judgment come. You see, this is not just a normal fire that breaks out. This is something that absolutely destroys this whole place in an hour. And the whole system collapses, and because this was the center point. And talks about the merchants of the earth weeping and all of these things. And it talks about how they stand, verse 15, afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. Verse 17, in 1 hour, so great riches come to naught. Every shipmaster and the company and ships and sailors, as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like this city? So here they were all the way out to sea. You see, they could see this great mushroom-shaped cloud going up. And it describes how that with violence, verse 21, that great city Babylon is thrown down and shall be found no more. And this, of course, is what is going to occur. And you think of all the people, all the generations that read this, that up until our time, they could never really grasp how something like this could happen. They could not really imagine how this sort of thing could occur in this way so quickly, so instantaneously. You know, how do you bring a city down and absolutely destroy it in an hour's time? Prior to the end of World War II, people really could not have understood this. But the city that Nimrod built is going to be destroyed. God tells His people, the message in Revelation 18:4, come out of her, my people. So the system that Nimrod built, symbolized by Babylon, is not what God wants His people to be a part of. Human civilization, in terms of its religion, in terms of its whole approach, is not something that is anchored on the truth of God. It's anchored on other things. God tells His people that we have to come out of Babylon. Just as Abraham had to physically leave, he also spiritually left. And you know, that's what often has not happened. Sometimes people have physically come out. Ancient Israel physically left Egypt, but they brought Egypt with them in their hearts. We have to spiritually leave Babylon, to turn our back on this society and its ways and its values. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 50, Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 38, we find that Babylon is called the land of graven images. They are mad upon their idols. The land of graven images. It's indicted as a source of idolatry and false religion. They're mad upon their idols. You know, a lot of people don't think there's any big deal in graven images and having things of that sort. Yet it's something that God indicts over and over. That's not, He tells His people that He wants to be worshipped in spirit and in truth. So Babylon is a source of idolatry. It's a source of false religion. Over in chapter 51 here, verse 7, we find Jeremiah 51:7, Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. The nations have drunken of her wine. The nations are intoxicated by the teachings of Babylon. Now, what does it mean to be intoxicated? You know, when somebody's drunk, when they're intoxicated, they've lost their sense of balance. They've lost their ability to make accurate perception and judgment. They're distorted in their actions, in their conduct, in their thinking. Things are exaggerated. It's not balanced. It's not steady. The nations have lost a sense of balance and equilibrium that can only come from the Word of God. They are intoxicated with false teaching. So human society, the world over, has been corrupted by the false standards and false values derived from Babylon. So when we look at our modern society that seems so far removed, yet what are we still doing? In our country, in our nation, and all over the world, we're still celebrating holidays and things that go all the way back to ancient Babylon. Things that have their tie-in all the way back. So many of these systems that date right back. Now let's look a little further in the remainder of the lesson. Let's look a little bit at the customs and the traditions that have derived from man building his own civilization. Does it make a difference to God what customs and traditions and holidays we observe? Does it make any difference one way or the other? Or isn't one holiday just as good as another? Well, let's notice. Let's go to Deuteronomy 12. What did God tell ancient Israel about following pagan religious customs? Deuteronomy 12, verse 29. When the Eternal your God shall cut off the nations from before you where you go to possess them, and you succeed them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you be not snared by following them after that they be destroyed from before you, and that you inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. You shall not do so unto the Eternal your God, for every abomination to the Lord which he has hated they have done to their gods, even to the point of human sacrifice. God says, what things soever I command you, observe to do it. You shall not add thereto nor diminish from it. God wants to be worshipped exactly as He said. He does not want people trying to copy the practices of paganism. Now, God instructed ancient Israel that very clearly. When they went into the land, they weren't to try to look at all these customs and think, well, we could do that for God. These people did it for Baal, but we can do it for God. They set up this little tree and decorated it, and they did it in honor of Baal and Nimrod. They did it in honor of the sun god. We'll do it in honor of Christ. Well, no. God wants to be worshipped the way He said. So, we find this brought out very clearly here in Deuteronomy 12. Let's notice what Jesus Himself said back in Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7 and verse 6. Christ answered, verse 6, and He said unto them, well has Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Laying aside the commandments of God, you hold the tradition of men. Can involve a number of things, and the specific people that He was rebuking had to do with various customs concerning the washings of pots and cups. Verse 9, He said, full well you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your own tradition. So here are people elevating human custom and tradition above the commandments of God. And Christ said that they worshipped Him in vain. It was not acceptable worship. They were worshiping Him in vain if they were teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. You cannot worship the true God the false way. You can't worship God according to the Babylonian system and have it acceptable to Him. He told ancient Israel that in Deuteronomy 12. Christ reiterated it in His day in Mark chapter 7. Notice that the Apostle Paul taught the same thing. Because let's understand, the various pagan religions, the various Gentile religions, did not represent just another way of worshiping the true God. Notice what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Verse 18, he says, now look at Israel after the flesh. Are not they which eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? Don't they share in the altar? When the sacrifices were made, the priest ate some, the offerer ate some, a portion of it was burned on the altar to God. Look at that. When they ate of those, weren't they sharing in the altar? Weren't they taking part of that? Now verse 19, what say I then? That the idol is anything? Am I saying that this idol is a real is a real God, or is some sort of rival to the true God? Am I saying that which is sacrificed to offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? What harm has occurred? Verse 20. What I say is that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, and not to God. I would not have that you should have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot be partakers, sharers of the Lord's table and of the table of demons. Now that's a pretty strong statement. You see, Paul says ancient Israel, when they took part and ate the sacrifices, they were sharing in the altar of God. They had a part in the true worship of the true God, and they were partakers of the altar. Now, look at what the Gentiles sacrifice. That what they're sacrificing, those idols, are really the power behind those is demonic. The various gods that they worshiped, whether it was Jupiter or Saturn or Baal of the Canaanites or whatever it may have been, these were demonic spirits that were involved. And so they were involved in a religion that was really honoring demons. Now, they didn't fully understand all of that, but Paul makes it plain. He says, the demons, Satan and his demons are involved in all of the pagan worship. And these customs tie in, and they're the real powers behind the throne. They're the ones that are really the inspiration of these various pagan religions. So he said, keep away from that. You can't partake of the Lord's table. And we partake of the Lord's table every year at the Passover. The symbols of the sacrifice of Christ. You can't partake of the Lord's table and partake of the table of demons. You can't do that. You can't have it both ways. The point is that the Bible shows that the customs we keep and the religious practices and traditions are very important. Now, let's look at something that virtually everybody is familiar with, and yet every year in December, many newspapers carry an article about the Christmas tree. Everybody acknowledges, you can look it up in the encyclopedia, you can read about it in a newspaper article in December. Everybody acknowledges that the Christmas tree is derived from ancient pagan customs. And it was never instituted by God in the Bible. You don't read where Paul set up a Christmas tree, or where Peter and John were decorating the Christmas tree. You don't read about that. That's nowhere in there. Let's notice though that there is a description in the Bible that does sound an awful lot like something that I used to do, and I think probably some of you used to do it too. In Jeremiah chapter 10, hear you the word which the Lord speaks unto you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Eternal, learn not the way of the heathen. Be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, the heathen are dismayed at them. The customs of the people are vain. One cuts a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. I can remember doing exactly that, going out there in the woods, with an axe, there on our farm, and going out there to cut a tree, and bringing it back, and then decking it with silver and gold, all the little gold and silver foil and little, all the little stuff, all the little doodads and things that you hang all over them. Deck it with silver and gold, fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. We had a little base there, and you had to fix it on so it'd stand up. Otherwise it'd fall over, so you had to nail it in there and get it fixed on this base and sort of cover up the base so that didn't look all ugly, put a little something around it. So you did that, and there, upright as the palm tree, it's standing right up there. But it can't speak, you have to carry it. It doesn't have some power. You can't set something like this up as people were wont to do, and to view it as something that was going to bring them good luck, and something that was going to you remember the old superstitions about what was the one? I think the one that I remember was that you were supposed to get rid of it by the first of the year, because it'd bring you bad luck to have have Christmas tree still there after the first of the year. Well, no, he says don't be afraid of it. It won't do. It can't do evil, neither can it do good. It's not going to bring you good luck or bad luck. It's not all the superstitions and customs and things that people have. So the Bible certainly describes the custom of cutting a tree out of the forest, taking it home, setting it up right, and decorating it. And there's some who've gotten you can't apply that to the Christmas tree. Well, sounds like a pretty good description to me. I don't know why not. It's what we're talking about here is the fact that God says, don't learn the way of the heathen. Now, can you trace the Christmas tree back historically? Did it come from pagan customs? Was it a part of ancient pagan ritual and religion of bringing in this tree? And well, yeah. That's not some great secret that we're the only ones that know. You can go look that up in encyclopedia. Virtually any reference source, if it gives much details on it, will take it back and explain how this goes way back. You can even find aspects of it in ancient Rome and ancient Babylon. So the Bible says, don't be learning, don't be putting into practice pagan ways, pagan customs. God doesn't want His people to copy those kinds of things. Now let's go a little further. Let's look back in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 8. Now here we have an interesting description. This is a description of a sunrise service. A sunrise service that was part of the abominations for which God punished the ancient house of Israel. Now notice here in Ezekiel chapter 8, Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 9, he said unto me, go in and behold the wicked abominations that they do here. And I went in and I saw, and I beheld every form of creeping thing and abominable beasts. So he saw all sorts of unclean animals. And all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about. They had all their little idols, little pictures up. And he saw these men of the ancients of the house of Israel. Verse 12, he says, Son of man, do you see what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagery. In here with their little idols and their little crucifixes and their little pictures and all of their little trinkets and things. Somehow God doesn't see. He's way off. Now, verse 13, he says, Turn yet again, and you shall see greater abominations that they do. And he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house that was before the that was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. And then he said, Son of man, I want to show you even greater abominations. Verse 15. And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, their faces toward the east, and they worshiped the sun toward the east. Now, when is the sun in the east? The time the sun's in the east is when it's coming up. If it was going down, they'd be facing toward the west. So here they got a sunrise service going on, and they're all bowing down and doing all of this. And God labels it as a great abomination. Now, this describes this ancient sunrise service that is here. And he says in verse 17, you see what they have done here. And is it a light thing to the house of Israel? Or to the house of Judah, rather, that they commit the abominations which they commit here? They fill the land with violence, have returned to provoke me to anger, and lo, they put the branch to their nose, or actually to my nose. This referred to one of the to an upright obelisk, to one of the Asherah, as they're termed in the Old Testament. Sometimes the term grove is used, which gives sort of a false connotation. These were upright poles or posts. It's the origin of where the steeple comes from. This sort of thing. Why stick something like that? Well, you can trace it back. It goes back to that. These obelisks that stood up. There is this day, to this day in Rome, there is a giant stone obelisk that stands up there in the courtyard of St. Peter's. And this was really one of the great engineering feats of the ancient world, because that stone obelisk was not built there. It was built in Egypt. It was built in what's called Heliopolis, which is the city of the sun. It is specifically referred to in the Bible. It's referred to in the book of Jeremiah. It's called Beth Shemesh, which means the house of the sun. And it was this center of ancient pagan sun worship in Egypt. Beth Shemesh in Hebrew, or it's better known by the Greek name for the city, Heliopolis. The Romans, the Romans literally took down this obelisk, transported it across the Mediterranean by ship, and it was quite a feat, because they didn't tear it all up. They transported it, they imported it there, and they have the real thing. And that's the origin of where you have these copies. On so many of the church buildings, they have these the steeples, which were just copies originally, smaller copies of these obelisks, and you go back into what all of that symbolizes, and I won't get into all of it, but it's a pretty horrible thing. And you can go back to Hislop's Two Babylons, and to Ralph Woodrow's Babylon Mystery Religion, and to other sources, and read about the symbolism that was involved. And it was an absolutely revolting, abominable thing in God's sight. And God does not want to be worshipped, does not want us to derive our means of worship from what the pagans do. So we read this ancient sunrise service here, and we also notice that it talks about weeping for Tammuz in verse 14. This was a period of around 40 days. It varied slightly in length, but it was around 40 days of penance that culminated with the celebration of the festival of Astarte, or Ishtar, or, as we pronounce it, Easter. This was the celebration that came at the conclusion of the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz. That's what these people had their face toward the sun. What is being described very clearly is the origin of the Easter sunrise service and Lent and all of that was tied in. In Babylonian mythology, Tammuz was the son of Easter, or Ishtar. Semiramis, as she's known in secular history. He was thought to be the reborn Nimrod. Nimrod was killed, and he was the reborn Nimrod. This was a festival celebrated in the spring that was centered on the death and resurrection of Tammuz, the Babylonian savior god. And the Egyptians had one, and various other nations had a savior god. A corruption of God's plan and purpose. Something that goes, again, all the way back to Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and the events that took place after the death of Nimrod, and the religion that his wife, who was also his mother, Semiramis, sought to build, to hold things together with a false religion centering on Nimrod. And this is where it goes back. Now, people say, well, we don't do it for that reason. That's not why we do it. Well, let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 12. once again. Notice what God said. Deuteronomy 12:1. These are the statutes and judgments which you shall observe to do in the land which the eternal God of your fathers gives you to possess it, all the days that you live upon the earth. This is what you're to do. You shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which you shall possess serve their gods. And upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree you shall overthrow their altars, break their pillars, burn their groves with fire, hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. You shall not do so unto the eternal your God. God didn't say, well, now go in there, and they've got some nice things, and you just sort of, give them a different name. Don't call it Saturnalia anymore, call it Christmas. Let's not call it, give it some of these old names. We just change the name. You can go down there. There are places, one of the big Catholic shrine in Mexico, the shrine of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Now, if you go down there and you do a little reading on the subject, you'll find that this was the center of worship. This was a central shrine for the Aztec. Worshiping the goddess that was the mother of the sun, and this was the center of Aztec worship. So when the Spaniards came over, what did they do? Well, they just kept they kept everything the same. The only thing they changed was the name, and so instead of the goddess of Guadalupe, they were worshiping the Virgin of Guadalupe. And you can go all over and you find how that the way that they sought to spread their religion and bring others in was just to absorb the customs that were already being practiced, the ideas that were already extant. And of course, when the Protestants came along, well, they tried to sort of trim down some of it, but they didn't get rid of the whole thing. And it's incredible. There are people that want to go back to that sort of thing. But God has some very strong things to say about it. And his instruction to his people was they were to destroy these things. And so, they come along and they've got these little crosses that they're wearing. Oh, isn't that nice? Well, if Christ had been shot with a gun, would they have gone around wearing guns around their neck, you've been electrocuted in an electric chair, wear a little electric chairs? I mean, number one, you're looking at a horrible instrument of, and there were several different forms of it. There were some that were just simply an upright post with the hands nailed above the head. There were others that had cross pieces or cross members at some point on there. There were several different shapes. The Bible doesn't specify exactly what was used, but what is very clear, and you can go and just do a little bit of research, you'll find that the use of the cross as a religious symbol did not originate with Christianity. You don't read Paul wearing one. In fact, I'll show you in just a few minutes. You can prove that he didn't. You don't read of the early New Testament church, even the early Catholic church, for 200 or 300 years after the time of Christ. It was already the time of Constantine, because you see, the cross was the sacred symbol of the sun. The sun god was pictured as the sun god with rays of sun coming out sort of in the form of a cross. And this was the motif that was adopted into Christianity at that point, or what passed for Christianity at that point. Now, you can go back and look at some of the paintings in the pyramids of Egypt and various of ancient inscriptions, and you'll find that the cross you find it right there. It was a religious symbol. It was the symbol of Tammuz. It was the religious symbol, and it was worn, you'll see it, worn around the necks of the Egyptian priests. In fact, it was very interesting. I did not bring it with me this evening, but a little over 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago, an article came out in Biblical Archaeology Review of a remarkable discovery that had been made there in the land of Israel. In excavations in the area of Samaria, they had uncovered a royal seal. Now, from time to time, they uncover royal seals or uncover something with an inscription on it that can clearly be identified as associated with one of the characters mentioned in the Bible, and that's always exciting. You find some ancient king or queen's name on there, and it ties in and just sort of makes things come alive. Well, this one was a very well-known character, this particular seal. It was the seal of Queen Jezebel. And they had pictures of it in there. This was the seal of Queen Jezebel. They had pictures of it in Biblical Archaeology Review. And you know what the center point of the seal was? A cross. A cross. The Egyptian form of the cross, which is sort of the cross with like a little halo at the top. There are several different variations. Jezebel, of course, worshipped Baal and Molech. And the point is, God said, destroy. You utterly destroy the places where they worship. You overthrow their altars, break their pillars, burn their groves, hew down their graven images. You destroy, you get rid of everything that they had associated with worship of their God. He didn't say, adopt it and say, well, now they did it for Baal, but this just reminds me of something else, and I think it's sort of pretty, and I'm going to keep it and wear it for this. Anyway, that now I mentioned, I said I'll show you that Paul didn't believe in that. I can prove that pretty clearly. Let's just go to Acts chapter 19. Probably a variety of places you can go, but I think this is an interesting one. In Acts 19, and we'll pick it up in verse 23. The same time there arose no small stir about that way. You see, Paul was teaching a way of life. He wasn't teaching, just believe in Jesus. He was teaching a way of life. A certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain under the craftsmen. They made a lot of money off of this, making these little shrines for Diana, these little images and little idols and little things that out of silver. That was quite a source of gain. And he called together with the workmen of like occupation. He got a meeting together. This was evidently a center for mining and refining silver, and there were a lot of silversmiths. And one of the big demands that they had was for religious articles centering around the worship of Diana. And he said, he got them all together, and he said, sirs, verse 25, you know that by this craft we have our wealth. Now, he's really gotten down to business here. This is the whole thing. He said, we make a good living here, and a lot of us have gotten pretty wealthy. And how did we do it? We did it as silversmiths. We make all of these little shrines, these little idols. You see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul persuades and turns away much people, saying there be no gods which are made with hands. So that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also the temple of the great God. It sort of adds that in. It's going to be bad. He's turning people away from the worship of Diana. The biggest thing that this guy was worried about was, this is bad for business. This is definitely bad. Not only has he got it stirred up here in Ephesus, he's got things stirred all over Asia. Now, if Paul had come in the way a lot of people think, he'd have been good for business. They'd have been making little shrines to the Virgin, and they'd have been making crosses and crucifixes, and they'd have just had a whole new line of work. They could have turned out something else. If Paul had taught what some people think, they wouldn't have been stirred up that he was costing them all this business. He was going to cause them to lose money. You see, all of this was associated with idolatry, and it was recognized as idolatry. It's a remarkable thing, even the testimony of some of the early Catholics, dating back to even after the time of the Emperor Constantine, that it was that long and later before the use of images and pictures was accepted into worship. Even Eusebius, who was one of the early Catholic historians and was there with Constantine at the Council of Nicaea, even he considered the use of images and all of that as idols, idolaters. and was outraged when Constantine's sister wanted him to get her a picture of Jesus down in the area of Caesarea, which is where he lived. She wrote him and wanted him to get her this picture. He was just outraged. He said, that's idolatry. So it is a remarkable thing, the things that have come to be accepted. But what we find as we go through is that the origin of this world's civilization goes back. It goes way back. It goes back to a choice that our first parents made of rejecting the way of revelation and choosing the way that seemed right to them. When you go through the story of the pre-flood world, you read that of a man by the name of Cain, who had an approach to life that became the pervasive approach, a way of death, a way of violence, a way of not yielding to God, but of pursuing his own ways. Things got so bad, so violent, so horrible, that God simply wiped out humanity and started over with the family of Noah. And yet, as we saw this evening, within just a matter of a little over 100 years, things were badly getting off the track again. One of Noah's great-grandsons, Nimrod. The city that Nimrod built, Babylon, and all the way through the rest of the Bible, we read of this Babylonian system, the religion, the culture, the attitude that spread out from Babylon. And so we come down to our day today and realize that so much of what had its origins in Babylon is still with us. Babylon is still here. And it is important that we recognize that and understand the real origin of so many of the things that are simply taken for granted in our society. Now, the next Bible study we're going to be getting into has to do with the promises to Abraham, and where this sets the stage for so much of what comes a little later in the Bible, and certainly an understanding of prophecy. So I'll pass out questions on that for next time.